Alright guys, so I got a question from a fellow. His name is Joe Garage. That's what he calls his channel. Now, his question was, when I have a board that's cupped and I plane the cup out of it, does the cup come back? And one of his question or his comment was that he doesn't have a kiln at the present time. Well, let me put it to you like this. The secret, and we'll start at the end and work our way forward. The secret for keeping wood flat is to get the moisture content stabilized. Okay, so that means that like when you build furniture, when a person makes a really nice wood furniture, I'm not talking about particle board crap, I'm talking about real wood, solid. You know, you can't, no matter what word you use, these freaking Chinese have figured out how to call wood that. But anyway, solid through and through, like let's say cherry wood, okay? All solid wood. Has an end grain on it that's not fake. Alright, so anyway, here's the thing. If inside the house the moisture content is 6 or 7%, and you get the wood down to 6 or 7% while you're making the furniture, okay, and then you stain it, polyurethane it, or however you're going to do it, varnish, I don't care how you do it, but you seal it so that it can't take on any more moisture, and you put that in the house, that thing is going to stay flat for years and years and years, okay? It's not going to do anything because you have the moisture content down low. But here's the problem that might be happening to you. Now, you know, there's a lot of things that can take place in this, but since you have a mill and stuff, you'll understand most of what I'm saying. And then I'll just tell you fill in the gaps. The one thing is that when you dry without a kiln and you air dry, your moisture content's not going down below 19%. Now that's in my area, okay? So, in other words, like the pine boards that I have on the backhoe there right now, that's not all pine, but the pine boards were air dried last year, just like these 2x4s that are, I don't know if you can see them. There's 2x4s over there that I have on a pile. Okay, those are being air dried. So that air drying, no matter what, where the heck are you? That air drying, I can't even find it now. Yeah, there it is. That air drying of lumber is going to go down to 19%. And that's the best that's going to do. No matter how long I leave it out there, 19%. Unless we have an unseasonably dry summer, you know, like a drought, it's going to be around 19%. It's not going to change. Now, like I've had this door open all morning here since I've been pulling boards out of it. And you can see the relative humidity here is above 30. Now, it needs to be around 30 in order to take the moisture content of the wood down into the 6s or 7s and have a lot of air moving through it. But to answer your question, if you plane wood that's at 19% and then you go to use it for something and it's not stacked neatly, you know, one on top of the other, what's going to happen is, think of it this way. A lot of wood only has like 30% moisture content, and especially when you're cutting in the wintertime like we do around here. We cut in very, very early spring. Like the best time to cut logs is December, January, and February, and not past that. Once you get too far past that, you're getting too much moisture in the wood, and there's all kind of things that go wrong with that problem, and I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, so let's say that the moisture content is at 40%. When you're down to 19%, you're only like half the moisture's out of the wood. That means you have a lot of moisture in there to get rid of yet. And if you're going to be making something that's going to go into house like furniture, or even if you're stacking the wood, like say in your garage where it's drier and the moisture content can go down below 19 after you've planed it, you're going to get movement in it. There's no doubt that you're going to get movement. Now, I'll just show you something else here too, and it depends on the wood. Some wood is a lot worse than others. If you look, let's see, not this one, but this is maple, and I just want to show you this. If you look down that edge, you see that bump where that knot is? Now, I didn't cut that like that. I cut these boards straight on the sawmill. I couldn't cut a cut like that if I had to. But the point is that this is how it dries and moves and carries on until it gets down with certain moisture content. Right now, this wood is down to 7%. Okay, so chances of it cupping anymore are slim and none, because that's the whole purpose of a woodworker getting wood to the moisture content he wants, and then going and building whatever he wants to build out of that. It's the same thing like if you take these boards and you lay them on concrete. Let's say you have 2 boards, you lay them on a concrete slab in your garage. The face of the board that's down to the concrete, as long as the concrete's dry now, I'm talking about old concrete. If the face is dry, okay, it's going to stay more dry resting on the concrete than what the top will. The top will take on moisture. Well, if the top takes on moisture, it's going to stretch. And when it stretches, it bends the wood. That's the whole point, okay? That's what makes wood cup, either losing or gaining moisture. Now, that's not all that happens. I mean, sometimes you have, depending upon the way that the grain is cut, now pretty much of this stuff has already been painted, but the grain of the wood has a lot to do also with cupping. If you're slab sawing, which most of us do because quarter sawing is such a tedious chore, you're going to end up with some boards that are crooked. Now, a lot of this maple that's on here, if you look really closely, it looks like there's some pretty crooked looking boards. That's because I air dried that maple. And maple, for some reason, for me, it gives me a hard time. It wants to move around. Now, it could be the quality of the logs not there. You know, I don't have really great maple. That's possible. Because when I go out there, I'm mostly getting red oak, white oak, things like that. So, you know, that's mainly what I have around here. Now, on the rest of this pile here, this is maple in here yet. So now you can see I have 2 nice looking maple boards. The rest are some smaller stuff that I just cut out. That last board looks like it's going to give me some grief because the pith where the center of the maple tree is in it, and it's probably going to cup. But the other 2 look to me like they're not cupped just from sitting there. Now as I get down into my pile, they stay flatter and flatter. But your whole problem with cupping has to do with moisture. Once you solve the moisture problem and you get it down low enough and you store that properly, you won't have any problems. Now, even though my greenhouse is open to some air can get into the greenhouse, because I have that glass, or I'll call it glass, but I'm talking about this stuff here. Even if I put the wood in there and stack it in there, the moisture content very seldom goes back up to 19 because it's so it's so hot in there all the time. It's usually, during the summertime, it's usually above 80. Now, I don't know where you're at, but that's hot for here. So above 80 degrees, I'm not going to get very much moisture coming back into the wood, especially the core of the wood. In other words, the wood that's in the middle or the bottom of the pile. Now, do I get some cupping? Sometimes I do. It all depends on the cut that it's made. If it's a slab cut, yep, I'll get cupping. Sometimes. If it's, you know, if it's drying on one side and not the other, I may get cupping. Okay? In other words, if I'm down to 19% and all of a sudden I lose another 5 or 15 or whatever it is percentage on one face, you can't help but get cupping. That's the nature of the beast. I mean, I can force wood to cup to prove this, but let me just looking around here at some of the stuff I have. Here's a piece of siding. Now, when I cut this siding, it was as flat as all the other pieces. But because this piece was facing up, you notice how it's cupped, because this is drying here on this face. This face is drying. The opposite face still has moisture in it. Now, if I turn this around and I leave this sit out here for a couple days with the sun hitting it, you will see this flatten out. Okay? It all has to do with moisture. That's all it is. It's either moisture or the cut of the board. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some freaking trees that no matter how you cut them things are going to give you grief. Okay? Look at this here. This is a piece of cherry that was cut in the pith, and it looks like it's, to tell you the truth, it's not cupped. It just has the pith in it, which makes it bad. But let me just shut the camera off for a second. I want to show you these 1x12. Okay, now if you remember last week, I think it is, if you watch my channel, I cut these 1x12. Now these 1x12, for all intents and purposes, should have been cupped because they were drawing on one side. But what happened was I was flipping them over knowing that, you know, I didn't want them to cup or split. So they're very nice and flat yet. I mean, you know, that's not perfectly a straight edge there, but you can see that they're pretty darn flat. And the reason for that is because when you flip them over like I've been, you end up having an equal amount of moisture coming out off of the board on both sides. Okay, you can see how brown that is compared to that white. That's because I had flipped this a couple of times. And that's what I say about being, you know, watching what you're doing and pay attention to detail. The difference between paying attention to detail, which someone said was anal, is you have a straight board, it stays straight or flat, no cup, or you have one that is cupped. It all depends on, you know, what you're doing with it. So it's all a matter of moisture. If you're drying wood, surface drying wood, or I call it surface drying, but it's air dry. When you air dry wood and you're only down at 19%, you still run the risk of cupping just because of the way that you have moisture in the wood. You have to be able to get the moisture out of the wood. Now, this maple, like I was saying, that's in here, this is going to give me grief, this pile. It's all cut into 2-inch boards, and it turned out pretty bad. It's mainly because I air dried it, and then I tried to stack it, and when I put it in here, I put it in here towards the end of summer, and it was still pretty warm, and it just didn't handle it right. It didn't like being outside and then put into the kiln the second, you know, after the fact. So I like putting the hardwood right into the kiln the first time, and you end up, you know, with some pretty good boards. Now, you know, just to give you an idea, this is a piece of maple here. Look at that freaking thing. That's bent, skewed. It's warped in every way that it could be warped. So something like this, I'll probably run it through the planer, but I won't try to take any cupping or anything out of it. I'll just leave it through the way it wants to go, just to smooth it out, because I can use some small stuff like that for, you know, parts in furniture, like supports for drawer slides or something, or, you know, corners that I'm going to use as a stiffening or a board or a strong back for something. That's where I would use stuff like that. But I hope that answers your question. It's the moisture in the wood that is your problem. If you can get the moisture from a kiln down to 6-7%, and then store it like that, chances of you getting any cupping after the fact are slim and none. I have a lot of red oak in there. Now, I'm not going to say you won't get any, but I have a lot of red oak in my greenhouse, you know, that I stored last year, and it has not cupped. It is very nice and flat. You know, in fact, I had given some to a furniture maker, and he had says to me he was really surprised at how well, you know, the wood was to work. He said when you cut it, it didn't relieve any tension or anything. It was pretty, you know, solid the way it was. Now, and that's the same thing with this cherry here. Now, this cherry dried really nice in the kiln. You can see the edges of it are fairly straight. And that's, you know, another thing. If you cut and then you heat wood and you heat treat it for parasites, sometimes you also can get it to be like hard surfaced, and once you do that, it kind of keeps it from warping, but not always. So I wouldn't worry about all that stuff. If I was you, I would consider, how can I, first of all, get your kiln built as quick as you can. I understand you're building a shed, and you're going to need a shed for storage or tools or whatever, but get yourself a kiln built. That's why when I got the sawmill, the first thing I did was build the cribbing and stuff for the sawmill. The first thing I built with the wood that I got from the sawmill was the kiln. Okay, and you need to do the same thing. Get your kiln built. Get it to operate properly. Make sure you build it, you know, according to the specs that they have from Virginia Tech. They have a good job there. Those kids did figuring all that out, and that professor. So do that. And then I think you're going to find you're going to have a lot easier time working with your boards. And just keep in mind, too, that a lot of times the boards themselves, depending upon, you know, the tree, the type of wood, I mean, like, look at that belly sticking out of there, right where the knot is. But oak or maple, I'm not using long boards of maple to build anything. I'm going to be cutting all this stuff down into approximately 30-inch pieces because of making furniture. You know, at the most, even wainscoting or wainscoting or whatever you want to call it, even if I was going to use maple for that, I would still not be using 8-footers. So that's my answer to your comment. And if I was you, that's what I would concentrate on. The moisture content's the problem. Okay, or at least one of them. The moisture content is the main problem. The cut and how you cut the boards is the other problem. If you take a look at these boards here, if you remember, I had cut these a couple days ago. This is probably the worst red oak I've ever seen. There's knots, there's splits, there's stress, there's compression wood. Yet, this thing is staying nice and straight because I had left it sit out and I was separating it. I left it separate like this. And what was happening is that the wood was getting moisture from all 4 sides. It was drying evenly. And that's one of the other things too, trying to get wood to dry evenly. You know, if you can get it to dry evenly, that's going to solve a lot of your problems that you have. So, all right, I hope that answers your question. Have a good one.